When I was first watching this series, I got into a rhythm of watching a movie at night and then the next day going to my friend at work and going on a long rant about what had happened. So when I got to the end of the world at the end of Beneath the Planet of the Apes and told her about it, we were a little curious about the fact that there were three movies in this continuity after it. And since we noticed that some of the actors crossed into the next few movies, and I knew that one of the movies, the fourth one, Conquest, started in 1999, my friend came up with the ridiculous idea that some of the characters would go back in time, escaping the world-ending blast from beneath. I felt like that seemed unlikely, as that's not how time travel has been established in this series, and that would be silly even for a series that had just had nuke-worshipping cultists. Clearly, I didn't realize what kind of franchise I was dealing with.
So that's how it all started.
Escape from the Planet of the Apes is a good movie, and I would recommend you watch it before you watch this if you've seen Planet of the Apes and know the plot of Beneath the Planet of the Apes. However, you should go in knowing that it has a completely different feel. Part of that comes from the fact that this movie takes place in the 70s as opposed to the post-apocalyptic future of the previous two movies, but it also just has a completely different feeling to it besides that. Here's the weird thing about Planet of the Apes. The franchise is, on a whole, pretty depressing, and Planet of the Apes and Beneath the Planet of the Apes are, though not in a traditional sense, tragedies. They may be more existential in nature, especially the first one, but they are tragedies, and despite the fact that they are very goofy at points, from beginning to end, they at least attempt to be very serious movies. Escape from the Planet of the Apes is not like that at all. Indeed, when I first watched it, I thought that they had finally accepted the ridiculous nature of the franchise and had decided to make a comedy. Let me explain. The movie does not immediately start with comedy, but instead starts with an almost suspenseful scene of the US military finding a spacecraft, which we later learned is the ship Taylor flew in the first movie, and bringing it ashore to see if there's anyone inside. The scene takes a few minutes with little to no explanation about how we even got here, and it's a cold open. The credits do not play until three astronauts exit the ship and we see who they are. And they are, strangely, our friends, Zira and Cornelius, and a third ape introduced in this movie, Dr. Milo. And then the credits hit, with what I felt was rather lighthearted and frankly goofy music, and in part, pulling a common thing from TV shows, especially comedic ones, and showing the characters as it tells you who they're being played by. And it was this that really made me think this was a comedy. Admittedly, part of this was because I had seen Beneath the day before and was still reeling from its ending that I had found to be extremely funny. Though in my defense, the beginning of this movie pretty much is a comedy, with most of the comedy coming from humans experiencing these intelligent apes and being highly confused. So, of course, that only makes sense, and I think starting this movie from the perspective of the humans, despite the fact that the characters we know are the apes who will end up being the main characters, helps remind the audience that, yeah, actually, you may have gotten used to it, but it is really weird that these apes are doing human activities like changing clothes and have a suitcase and grabbing plates and silverware to eat an orange? No, that's not. Why would you eat an orange like that? Now, what's fun about this scene, besides the insane way the three apes are eating oranges, is that it also continues Zira's distaste for gorillas that was introduced in Beneath. Now, she hates them so much that the concept of being in a cage next to one makes her slam her plate down. Though, I suppose, as we later learn, she thinks the gorillas are responsible for the end of the world, so maybe she's got a point. It's just for a franchise that seems to be condemning racism, there does seem to be a race of apes that have no redeeming qualities. Eventually, the trio get moved to a zoo for study, and finally we learn what's going on. Some of this information is sped through the movie, but I'll explain it all here. It turns out that while the gorillas were off invading the cultists from beneath, Dr. Milo had found the ship Taylor had landed in, and somehow, despite the fact that they are a rather primitive race, managed to fix it enough that the trio got into space right before the Earth burned up, and the blast from the explosions hit them into a reverse time disturbance, back to 2 or 3 years after Taylor had left Earth. The gang, specifically Dr. Milo, had realized this and decided that not revealing how intelligent they are is probably the safe thing to do, as humanity probably wouldn't be too happy to find out the Earth was taken over by apes and then everyone died. Unfortunately, Zira doesn't really agree with this, as she prefers to be honest, and as a Dr. Lewis Dixon and a Dr. Stevie Branton test her intelligence, she does far too well. Actually, let's talk about these tests for a second. There's a test where Dr. Dixon puts a bunch of shapes on the table, hides the table, adds more shapes, shuffles them, and then shows the table, and Zira points out which ones were there before. And maybe it's just the angle, or maybe I'm dumber than a chimpanzee, but some of these shapes look exactly alike. How would Dr. Zira know which green cylinder was there before? How would Lewis know which green cylinder was there before? Not that it really matters how well she does at these tests, since Zira ends up speaking, causing appropriately comedic reactions from the doctors, including Dr. Branton fainting. And then Dr. Milo dies. The three of them were arguing about what had just happened, agitating a sick gorilla that was in the cage next to them, and Milo got too close to the cage wall, getting choked out. I hope you enjoyed your 15 minutes of comedy. Not that the movie immediately becomes tragic, but the downward slope does start after this point. Before things get too bad, we are introduced to a few other important characters, specifically the President of the United States, because of course, and Dr. Otto Hasslein, the President's senior science advisor, who will eventually become the antagonist of the movie. Hasslein's main introduction comes in the form of a presidential commission of inquiry of Zira and Cornelius, which allows for some more comedy, like the presiding priest getting upset at the idea of two apes being married. Most of this inquiry is exposition, to remind viewers of what happened in the previous two movies, though it's interesting because it's from Zira and Cornelius' perspective, and they don't know about the cultists from beneath, only that the gorillas went to fight someone, and they don't know what caused the world to end, only that it was probably the gorillas' fault. The scene also explains some more about what I've already told you about how the gang got here, but there's two more important details here. 1. Cornelius lies about knowing Taylor. The pair also hides the fact that they experiment on humans and that apes hunt them for sport, and that the Earth was completely destroyed. They mention that humans are dumb, but not all the nasty details. They do tell Lewis and Stevie these details, who are, appropriately, a little disturbed. 2. While most of the commission thinks the entire thing is ridiculous, Dr. Hasslein fully believes what's going on, especially the part where they say they come from Earth's future, and seems very concerned about it. Dr. Hasslein even goes on TV to attempt to explain time travel, something this series keeps on trying to do, but the important thing here is that he believes that there are an infinite number of futures, and you can change yours. So, due to the fact that the inquiry was public, Zira and Cornelius become celebrities of an international proportion, and the next few scenes follow the pair as they acclimate to their newfound fame and the weirdness of living in 1970s America as two apes. This includes Zira being introduced to wine without really being told what it is, Lewis bringing Cornelius to a boxing match despite the fact that he's a pacifist, so obviously he does not enjoy that, and the reveal that Zira is pregnant. We also get Zira and Cornelius just being a cute couple, clearly massively in love with each other, which is fantastic. So Zira faints because she's pregnant, and as they're waiting for Cornelius to get back, Dr. Hasslein gives her wine, which immediately gets her drunk after only a few sips, and he manages to find out that the world ends due to the war between the gorillas and whoever they were fighting. Also, apparently, there was a space tornado due to the Earth being destroyed, so that's exciting. Dr. Hasslein, of course, records her and manages to convince the president to let him interrogate the couple, despite the fact that the president doesn't really seem to care about what happens after he's not president anymore, but does know that voters like Zira and Cornelius. We'll get back to that conversation later. During the interrogation, we learn through Cornelius that apparently sometime in the future all cats and dogs died due to some disease, and humans, not wanting to be left without pets, decided apes were the next next best thing. After some time, the humans realized they could use the apes as slaves, and sometime even later, the apes became intelligent enough to realize they didn't like being slaves and revolted. And then, Hessline gets Lewis to drug Zira so she can tell them all about the fact that she dissected humans and knew Taylor. Now, of course, in Zira's time, the humans were no more than animals, and humans experiment on animals all the time, and shockingly, all the humans in this movie, despite the fact that they're disturbed by that, all agree that that makes sense, and she's not a horrible person for doing those kinds of things to humans in her time. And it's not like she did it to Taylor, who was clearly intelligent, so it's okay. What they don't like is the fact that Zira is pregnant with an intelligent ape that could, though I don't know why he would want to, mate with unintelligent apes of today and produce intelligent offspring, potentially spelling the beginning of the downfall of humanity. So the Presidential Commission decides to kill the unborn child and geld the two apes, but before that can happen, Cornelius kills a guy. See, throughout the movie, people keep calling the couple monkeys, and this is offensive to them, though how they know what a monkey is, I don't know. So when an orderly trying to convince Zira to eat for her unborn child calls the fetus a monkey, Cornelius, already angry about the fact that Zira was previously drugged, slams the orderly into a wall and decides to escape the compound with Zira. Now, it was an accident, and he doesn't even realize he killed the orderly until later, but that doesn't really matter for Dr. Hessline, who already wanted the pair dead, and this is as good of a reason as any to actually kill them, even if that means going against direct orders from the president who wants them captured alive. Unfortunately, Zira is in labor, and being on the run in the middle of the woods is not exactly ideal conditions for giving birth. But with Lewis and Stevie on their side, they're able to escape to a circus run by a man named Armando. A circus which actually has a chimpanzee named Heloise, who just recently had a child of her own named Salome. I'm sure that won't become relevant later. And it's in this scene that we get all three kinds of representations of apes in this movie. Because not all apes in this movie look alike. There's of course the intelligent apes of Zira, Cornelius, and Dr. Milo, who are mostly human with a lot of prosthetics and makeup, but for the unintelligent apes, like the gorilla that killed Dr. Milo and the circus chimp, they just used a guy in a really bad ape suit. Just ugly, disgusting things. And then there's the circus chimp's child and Zira's kid, who they decide to name Milo after Dr. Milo, who, may I remind you, had 3 whole scenes in the entire series before he died. The baby apes are just real baby chimpanzees, which is very jarring to have Zira hold as her own child. So Zira's able to give birth safely, but pretty quickly Hessline realizes the best place to hide a chimpanzee is with other chimpanzees. So he gets the military to start searching circuses and zoos and that sort of thing, which means the couple has to leave once again. And again with the help of Lewis and Stevie, this time to an old ship graveyard, specifically an old tanker. And the two couples go their separate ways one final time. Though, of course, not before some little kisses on the lips, because it's the 70s, I guess. Now, before the finale hits, I want to talk about Dr. Zira. She is easily the best female character in the entire franchise, and one of the best characters in general. Part of this is because Kim Hunter, the actress for Zira, is very good at expressing through the layers of makeup and prosthetics, but she's also just an extremely well-written and likable character. The writing manages to make her being a scientist and a wife and a mother all just things that she happens to be while being Zira. And I may also be biased, but as her main trait seems to be a desire for truth, something we see a lot in the 1968 movie, but also in Escape, where every time she hides the truth, she feels extremely bad about it, usually telling someone just to get it off her chest, and when the truth of the end of the world does finally come out, she feels a lot better about it. And I am a big proponent of being open and honest, despite the fact that in this movie it does cause some problems. Because, yeah, Zira isn't exactly flawless either, and those flaws do end up causing problems, and they don't shy away from that or try to explain it away either. She is extremely stubborn and will sometimes just do stupid things, like leaving her extremely recognizable suitcase in a pretty easy to find spot while on the run, causing her and her husband's death. That's right. The finale consists of Zira and Cornelius being found, partially because of Zira's suitcase and partially because they're just not very good at hiding, Dr. Hessline taking things into his own hands and killing Zira and the baby chimp, and getting shot by Cornelius in the process. Cornelius then also gets shot by the police, who arrive just a little too late. It's a pretty devastating ending, especially since Zira and Cornelius are the only characters who have managed to survive 3 whole movies, and this movie specifically did a very good job making them even more likable than they already were. And now that the movie is over, it's time to realize that the name Escape from the Planet of the Apes is pretty weird, considering the escape the title is presumably talking about happens before the movie even starts, unless we're talking about Dr. Hessline's attempt to figuratively escape the future of a planet of apes. And speaking of Dr. Hessline, I want to talk about his ideals and why he does the things he does. Because, like Dr. Zaius in the first movie, he's kind of got a point. It's just that he's also trying to kill our main characters. Let's harken back to that conversation with Dr. Hessline and the president. Now, the conversation's already interesting because somehow we're agreeing with the guy whose main priority seems to be don't upset the voters by killing 2 celebrities, and who cares what happens after that, but the president does make some good points. In continuing with the theme of humans being awful, he doesn't seem to mind the idea of apes taking over from humans, considering how much better Zira and Cornelius seem to be compared to humanity. And even if their descendants end up destroying the world, that's still killing innocent people just because they may create people that will one day cause problems. And an issue that both the president and Hessline have: if you know the future, do you have any right to change it? But in a later scene, Hessline makes a much better point. Like with pollution and the nuclear war, it's better to do something now than to wait for it to become a much worse problem. And that seems to be the core of Hessline's belief. Stop the problem before it becomes a problem. And I agree with him, especially in those situations. Unfortunately for Hessline, it's his own actions that cause apes to eventually take over, because the baby chimp he killed is not Zira and Cornelius's kid, but rather the circus chimp Heloise's kid, Salome, switched out with the baby Milo before the couple left the circus. Remember, part of Hessline's concern is that Milo would have an intelligent child with a dumb ape, but I firmly believe that in normal circumstances that would not happen. If Zira and Cornelius had ended up surviving and gone back to the circus, as was the plan, Milo presumably would have just grown up and just not have any kids, because having a child with a dumb version of your species is weird. But now Milo's in hiding, pretending to be a dumb ape, and that means that, as we see in the next movie Conquest, he's much more likely to have to reproduce with a dumb ape, starting the beginning of intelligent apes. In his conversation with the president, Hessline wonders if killing the apes in an attempt to stop them from taking over is part of God's plan or not, and if humanity is fated to be taken over. Of course, this was impossible to know, but now, thanks to Hessline, it seems it is.
Which future has God, if there is a God, chosen for man's destiny? If I urge the destruction of these 2 apes, am I defying God's will or obeying it? Am I his enemy or his instrument?